Yes, another week has gone by, and the insanity continues. Last night, many of us stayed up late. It didn't actually. It wasn't too late. The results that came in from New York State, and look, it is the case that stories in places like New York and California get an inordinate amount of media coverage because a lot of media people live in New York and California. However, it is also the case that these states, because of their size and because of not just the media, but all the other industries that work through their state, have an outsized influence on national policy. So when California says we're going to have higher CAFE standards or emission standards for cars, the entire car industry changes what they're going to do because they have to meet California standards because that's where they sell the most cars in the country. When New York State, for instance, says we're not going to abide by this merger because there are state-based antitrust laws, and so this major cable company cannot merge in this state, it can destroy a merger for a company that is a national company. Not to mention, there's a lot of financial things that run through New York State, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a whole host of other reasons. We're talking about two very blue states in New York and California and other ones as well. But if a single payer healthcare system could happen in a state, and I'm not saying that's not preferable to a national one, it's much harder. But there are other proposals that could take place in a state like California or New York. And if it works there, there's absolutely no argument that it couldn't work other places. And so the outcomes of these elections are very important. Andrew Cuomo won. That was to be anticipated. The final tally definitely took a piece out of him. I think people had maybe higher expectations in some respects for Nixon. But the idea was to send a message to Cuomo. You're not going to become a Democratic nominee for president if you govern like you're living in 1993 and you're a third-way Democrat. That's just not going to happen. Cynthia Nixon got 500, and these are not totally final numbers, but pretty close. This will give you a sense of the turnout as opposed to 2014. Off-year election, right? Not a presidential election. Just for a primary, governor primary. Cynthia Nixon got 512,000 votes. Sadly, Cuomo got 977,000 votes. I don't want to toot my own horn. I don't know if I said this on air yesterday, but what did I say it was going to be? 65-35? It was 65.6 to 34.4. So
toot.
Toot. But that's not the interesting thing about this at all. What's interesting is Cynthia Nixon got over almost 150,000 more votes in losing to Andrew Cuomo than Andrew Cuomo got when he won in 2014. In 2014, Andrew Cuomo beat Zephyr Teachout in a similar spread. She got 34.3% of the vote. Cuomo got 65.7% of the vote. Maybe a little less, actually. But he got 330,000 votes. She had 182,000. Cynthia Nixon got 512,000 votes. She almost got more than everybody who voted last time. That's how many people came out to vote in this election. And sadly, Jumaane Williams lost. And Tish James, my second choice, Zephyr Teachout, lost. And we'll talk a little bit about that. There's some people who theorize that this sort of new Democrat-style congressman jumped into the race as a way of taking votes away from Zephyr Teachout upstate, and which is exactly what happened. But the big news is, though, is that members of a caucus that would caucus with the Republicans, the IDC, 6 out of 8 of them lost. And some to DSA folks like Salazar, some to just progressive Democrats. But the IDC was not even operative anymore. Largely, I think, because of Cynthia Nixon. And yet they still lost relative to 2014 when they were operative and they all won. So there's definitely, obviously, something brewing here, and we'll talk more about that with Ben Dixon. But here is, and let me just say why I think, I'm not the only person who thinks that Cynthia Nixon was, in a large part, responsible. Obviously, when AOC won, that created a lot of energy around these races. But Cynthia Nixon was educating people. I went to a house party type of function where she's speaking to people in someone's apartment, and I think it was the first one that she ever did. Or at least as far as I know. And the top 3 or 4 issues she talked about were decriminalizing marijuana, was getting rid of the IDC, and maybe a couple other smaller issues. And shortly after she did that, Cuomo changed his stance on both of those things. By the time I saw her 2 months ago or a month ago, there wasn't as many issues for her to land on because he had already addressed those. So Governor Nixon was very successful in that regard. I am not the only person who believes that. I think this is about a week ago, maybe a couple of days ago. This was a week ago. No, Tuesday of this week, I think it was. Alessandra Biaggia, she is a lawyer who worked for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and in Cuomo's counsel's office, ran against Jeff Klein. He was the leader of the IDC. And she said the following: the moment that Cynthia got into the race, it helped my campaign because she started talking about the IDC almost incessantly. She said every day, the IDC, the IDC, the IDC. And for people who didn't know what it was, it gave them the education about what had been going on. I will tell you, there is no doubt the number of people who are aware of the IDC just went through the roof because of Cynthia Nixon bringing it to the fore. I mean, it got some attention in October. There was a campaign that was waged. They used Edie Falco, but really Cynthia Nixon was the one who crystallized this. And I would see it at these house parties. People were just like, what? The ID, what? How is that legal? How is that possible? So it's a big win, even in loss. And this goes to what I think, we were saying when they referred to it as the blogosphere. There is value in waging fights and losing. Here is Cynthia Nixon with her concession speech last night in New York.
The blue wave is real, and it is not only coming for Republicans, it is coming for Democrats who act like them. And as I said on the first day of this campaign, if we want things to finally change in New York State, we don't just need to elect more Democrats, we need to elect better Democrats. In our campaign, we took on one of the most powerful governors in America, and it wasn't easy. We had to fight just to get on the ballot. We had to fight just to get a debate. And we started with nothing, and we earned every single vote. And the establishment came at us with everything they had. Our allies and endorsers were threatened. My family was slandered. The other side spent $25 million trying to drown us out. But we wouldn't back down. We refused to be quiet, and we made our voices heard. And while the result tonight was not what we hoped for, I am not discouraged. I am inspired, and I hope you are too.
There you go. Cynthia Nixon compilation of parts of her speech last night, and I think you know, everything she said was borne out in the numbers last night. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back.